getting stuck in fishing gear. This is all too common a problem and can result in the death of majestic marine creatures such as whales and basking sharks, as well as the destruction of the fishermen's equipment. The project has established new protocols and guidance for creel fishermen, a shining example of the power of knowledge sharing and cooperation based on science. Scotland has a proud reputation for spectacular seafood, and this will only be enhanced by a robust plan for sustainable fisheries management, bringing future work to the range of sectors in the fishing industry and to onshore processing, often supporting fragile communities. Such sustainable development will also ensure that our marine biodiversity, fragile features and the contribution to tackling climate change are addressed. I hope everyone in the Chamber today and beyond will agree that sustainable management is a virtuous circle, also facilitating future generations of fishermen, as well as our seas themselves, far into the future. Thank you.
Don't take advantage, Mr Finnie, and to be followed by Mike Rumples.
Thank you, President Officer. I'd like to refer to our National Marine Plan, and it talks about clean, healthy, safe, productive and diverse seas managed to meet the long-term needs of nature and people. And some of the people I want to talk about have been touched on by Rhoda Grant and indeed Stuart Stevenson. These are the EU nationals and their families working in the fishing sector, and our earnest wish that they're able to remain in Scotland, contributing as positively as they do often in some of our more fragile communities. Scotland is a fishing nation, and I think there's consensus that the present common fisheries policy is not delivering a sustainable fishing industry in Scotland. And that has an effect on our coastal communities. European Greens have suggested a reform in the common fisheries policy. Fundamentally, we believe a whole ecosystem approach to fishery management is required. Fish stocks will only recover for the long term if we also protect spawning and nursery grounds. And that will require, as some previous speaker alluded to, designating large areas of water as out of bounds to fishing, between 20% and 40% of EU marine areas. And we're also keen to see some restraint on the expansion of aquaculture. Now, someone who represents the Highlands Islands, I recognise the valuable role that plays in communities. But aquaculture is not the solution to the problem of overfishing the oceans. And Greens certainly demand high environmental and health protection standards for aquaculture production, including organic aquaculture. And we believe it can be more environmentally damaging than exploiting wild fisheries. Now, the motion talks about the UK Government's White Paper, makes it clear the intention to allow EU boats access to Scotland's waters as a matter of right. But whatever happens, fishing nations can only experience long-term benefits by adopting ecosystem-based management approaches. Fish aren't concerned about our structures, whether that's EU, UK, common fishery policy, whatever. It is only going to be with shared management and cooperation within the UK and with neighbouring countries, because we must be custodians of our resources and have due regard to science. And that is about understanding the risks that fishing has posed and putting in place mechanisms to ameliorate these risks. And I certainly am concerned at some of the things I've heard, not necessarily in the Chamber today, that we get out of the EU and there's going to be this free-for-all bonanza. A significant risk is overfishing, and discards have been touched on as well. And of course, one anticipated benefit of the discard ban is the potential to increase fisheries revenue and resilience, which is to be welcomed. And that would mean more fish remaining in the sea due to improved selectivity, both in terms of where and how fishing is undertaken. But without sensible management, there's no realistic future for fishing at all. And that is setting sustainable levels to restore biomass above minimum MSF. And that will challenge the choke species. All vessels must have selective gear ability to fish in the most selective way in order to avoid choking. And this has been touched on. The European Maritime Fisheries Fund for the period 2014 to 2020, Scotland was getting 46% of the UK allocation, €111 million over 7 years. That's going to be a significant loss. In the short time that's left, I want to just conclude with making a few points, Presiding Officer, and that is that all powers in fisheries should be devolved to the Scottish Parliament. This is going to require cooperation, however we do things, and that is about the protection of spawning and nursery grounds. A whole ecosystem approach to fishery management is absolutely required. And as was touched on very eloquently by my colleague Claudia Beamish, we need to have robust monitoring, but also robust enforcement of our fishing. Thank you very much.
I have Mike Rumbles, followed by Marie Todd.
I thank Peter Chapman for bringing this motion for debate to Parliament today, as of course, in the words of his motion, there can be no doubt that the fishing industry is vital to Scotland's culture and it's vital to its economy and is a bedrock of many communities across the country. We couldn't agree more. The Liberal Democrats have long criticised the European Union's common fisheries policy as being remote, overly centralised and bureaucratic. We strongly believe that the industry and other stakeholders must be involved in the development of a plan for sustainable fisheries that works for our Scottish fishermen. And that's why we lodged our amendment to the Conservative motion being debated today, even though it wasn't taken for the debate. Now, had it been taken, our amendment didn't take anything out of the Conservative motion, but we believe that adding this to the end of their motion would have strengthened it where it needed, in our view, to be strengthened. And that's why we'll be supporting Labour's amendment, which seeks to do a similar thing. However, this does not mean that we are not critical, I'm afraid, of the Conservative Party for the decision to put at risk our access to the markets our fish processing businesses so dearly need. Taking us out of the European single market, and indeed the customs union, that's the important one, would, if Mrs May had her way, threaten the markets that our fishing industry so heavily relies on. I'll just give one example. If we're taken out of the customs union, that means that our fish processing businesses may face tariff barriers at our borders. But the financial barrier isn't the main barrier that faces our fish processors. They've coped remarkably well with the fall in the value of the pound against the euro as a consequence of the vote last summer. While no one likes to pay more taxes, our fish exporting businesses have coped with a fluctuating price for their goods and could similarly cope with increased costs at the border if they have to. Now, what is really worrying them is the delay at the border that will occur if they go through added bureaucracy and consequent delays as their goods are processed through customs. Remember, we're talking about real worries about fresh produce and concerns about time delays to markets. I will give way to Peter.
Peter Chapman.
I thank the member for giving way. Does he recognise and realise that 10 of the biggest 20 markets for our fish are not in the EU at all?
Mike Rumbles.
I have to say that that would indicate that you don't really compare, Conservatives aren't concerned about the European markets that are so important to our fish. All of the markets, and I would have thought Peter Chapman would realise this, I'm sure he does, that all the markets are important to us, and to threaten one of them with this added bureaucracy and delays to our exports is not on, quite frankly. I mean, I was saying that, you know, they have genuine worries. In recent years, we've all of us have seen this, on our TV screens, the long lines of lorries parked up on motorways in the south of England due to either ferry delays or channel tunnel blockages. Do our fish exporters have worries about being outside the customs union? You bet they have worries about that. Now, turning to what seems to be, and I'm conscious of time, the main point of conflict between the Conservatives and the SNP in this debate, I've listened very carefully to the barracking and the shouting and the exchanges. Deputy Presiding Officer, the fishing rights of our Scottish fishermen must not be traded away against other policy issues. It is right, of course, to take part in negotiations with our neighbours in the European Union, but these negotiations must be about fishing and access to markets. It must not be about using our fishermen as a bargaining chip in more general European negotiations. Thank you.
Marie Todd, followed by Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Our fishing industry is a vital part of the Scottish economy, and as someone who grew up in Ullapool, still one of Scotland's busiest fishing ports, I understand and value the cultural contribution that fishing communities make in Scotland. I was pleasantly surprised to find that the Conservative motion for today's debate recognised this. It's unusual for me to find anything to agree with in Conservative motions. I think it's plainly obvious, and I think it has been so for a very long time, that the common fisheries policy is not fit for purpose. I don't think it's a good deal for our fishing industry. That is why the SNP have consistently argued for it to be scrapped or for fundamental reform of the policy. That is our party's record on standing up for fishing, and it's a record that goes a long way back. Contrast that with the position of the Tories, the party who took Scotland into the EU and who described the fishing industry as expendable as they did so. I find it quite astonishing that the Tories have the audacity to bring this debate to the Chamber today, given their appalling record on Scotland's fishing industry. And their signalling on this issue so far indicates that they are preparing to barter again. Secretary of State for Scotland, David Mundell, said last year before the EU vote that Brexit will not lead to an end of UK involvement in or with the CFP. Theresa May said in her first major Brexit speech in Lancaster House, and I quote, "I do not believe that the EU leaders will seriously tell German exporters, French farmers, Spanish fishermen, the young unemployed of the Eurozone and millions of others that they want to make them poorer, just to punish Britain